G'day guys and gal. As we know by now, death isn't as quite as much of an ending as it should be in Warhammer 40k. Many people can revive themselves, many are revived by others, and even the ones that don't really ever come back can still pop up their head here or there. As Primarchs have the biggest, juiciest souls of them all, it's no shocker that when they die, they continue to influence the setting in one way or another. Sanguinius appearing to his sons in visions is one good example. Ferrus Manus is another, arguably more interesting example that we'll go over today. Before we get started, I'm so excited to finally announce the public release of the Burning Hand of Vengeance, a model I've been working on all year with the same guy who made the legendary Big E model. This really is my magnum opus, undeniably the dopest model of 2024, not just for major minis, but the entire hobbying space. Here is why. Model features like 7 head variants, multiple arm and weapon variants, and has 2 versions, the standalone edition and the diorama edition. The diorama edition features 3 Sluzz Marines in various states of getting their shit kicked in. However, I didn't want to just use these stunning Sluzzers as a base prop, so I had all 3 of them posed and made tabletop ready, which is great since the Emperor's Children were announced as the next Chaos faction coming out next year. This model took so long to make because I wanted to make sure it was perfect. The proportions are great for all different scales, which works well because it is available in 4 different scales. We have the tabletop scale for all your wargaming needs, 75mm art scale for those that want the details a bit bigger to paint, then we have the 1/12 scale bust size for those that want a truly epic project, and because I hate myself, we also made a Titanic 1/6 scale, which if you want to buy, you need to inquire first due to various reasons. This model is limited, not because I hate you, but because its detail makes it hard to mass produce, so we're only running it for 2 weeks only, or less now because the model technically launched on Friday, and I'm also not sure if I'll ever bring it back, so you don't want to miss out on getting your hands on quite literally the dopest model I've ever produced. While you're checking them out, we're also running a 30% off Black Friday sale on the rest of the range, which is the cheapest the range has ever been, so there's never been a better time to stock up on some major minis. The best way to support the channel while getting yourself something sick. Today we'll go over exactly what happened to Ferrus Manus when he died, including what became of his corpse, his silver arms, and his very soul. Now let's get into it. Ferrus was a stubborn bastard. Death was never going to be his true end, but it definitely didn't do him any favors. When Ferrus was slain, his body was quickly mutilated by the Emperor's Children and other traitor marines. They all sliced off pieces of him as trophies or just for fun. He was so torn up that he didn't even end up with a corpse per se. Only a few key elements of him remained. His skull was presented to Horus by Fulgrim as a trophy, whilst one of his silver fingers was taken by a word bearer, and somehow one of his entire necrodermis arms was actually retrieved by the Iron Hands and was successfully evacuated from Isfahan. Ferrus was so furious at his own death that the moment of his death created a new powerful demon called the Sapphire King, a demon that would plague the Iron Hands for millennia to come, and even hatched a plan to turn the entire chapter to chaos. But more on that later. However, as a side note, imagine being so pissed off at your own death that it created a cosmic entity. Fucking love Ferrus, man. Now, as a Primarch, Ferrus' soul was too powerful to just dissolve in the warp or be eaten by demons. If the warp god theory is correct, which I think it is, then Ferrus' soul would have returned to its home in the warp. Malcador and the Emperor said that given enough time, they would be able to revive Ferrus. However, they didn't have the time during the heresy. I believe they would have done this via creating Ferrus a new body and then coaxing his soul back into it. However, they couldn't, so Ferrus was left in limbo. Various things would happen to his various different pieces from here on, and none of it was good. His finger taken by the word bearer would be used to cut off a piece of the Fulgurite, a shard of the Emperor's psychic might that was stuck in Vulcan's chest to then be used for his own nefarious purposes. Ferrus' necrodermis arm taken by the Iron Hands would be used to create a large robot automata, which, in their grief, many Iron Hands would worship as Ferrus reborn, pushing the Iron Hands further down the path of the machine and low-key ruining them as a legion and a chapter. I made an entire video on the topic actually, where the Iron Hands had 2 paths, one led to glory, the other to becoming the most unlikable, irrelevant first founding chapter, and tragically they chose the wrong path. This automata would be destroyed by Vulcan, who saw it as an abomination and mockery of Ferrus, but the damage to the soul of the Iron Hands Legion remained. Ferrus' skull would remain with Horus over the course of the heresy, with the big bulgy Hardus even using it as his own personal therapist. He literally once said to it, "God damn it, why didn't you join me? I'm left with all the fucking retards and rapists." Now that isn't a one-to-one of what Horus said, but you get the idea. The skull of Ferrus would remain with Horus for the entire heresy. However, upon Horus' death, it would be taken and then given to the Iron Hands. But that isn't all. The blood of Ferrus that was on Fulgrim's sword was given to Fabius Bile in order to clone Ferrus by order of Fulgrim. Now you would think they could have used parts of his corpse for the cloning, however it was so badly torn apart and scattered that the best DNA they had for Ferrus was literally the dried blood on the fucking sword Fulgrim used to cut his head off. off. Surprisingly, this was enough, and Fabius managed to create robust clones of Ferrus. However, like most Primarch clones, he lacked the special Primarch source, and Fabius also couldn't clone the necrodermis arms of Ferrus, having to just give him gauntlets instead, something that enraged Fulgrim. Fulgrim would speak to these Ferrus clones over a board game and attempt to corrupt them to chaos, or at least make them see his perspective. Each time, the Ferrus clones would slowly regain their memories and then reject and fight their brother. Despite being a clone, Ferrus would still put up a fight, however each and every time the demonic Fulgrim would win, kill the Ferrus clone, and then they would bring in another. This cycle happened dozens of times, with Ferrus never even getting remotely close to falling to chaos, causing Fulgrim to eventually abandon the attempts, much to Fabius's relief. I can't imagine how resource intensive it would have been to clone a Primarch dozens of times, let alone the time cost as well. Not to mention every clone was armored in Primarch warplate, which also would have been very expensive. So Ferrus's corpse was completely fucked with and violated, even being used to clone himself and then have those clones butchered. But what about his spirit? Well, tragically, when Vulcan was captured and begun getting tortured by Conrad Curse, Vulcan vividly hallucinated Ferrus. The Ferrus ghost would taunt Vulcan and call him weak. However, this was more than likely Vulcan's own fracturing sanity combined with his guilt over Ferrus's death, rather than Ferrus actually being a dick and haunting Vulcan. However, it wasn't just all humiliation for the Primarch of the 10th. During the war in the Webway, just as the final custodian forces were being overwhelmed, the Emperor arrived and saved them after 1,000 psychers were fed to the Golden Throne to give him a couple of minutes to go hero mode. When the Emperor arrived, he brought the righteous fire of all of his frustration and rage and injustice. Ferrus manifested via the Emperor calling out to the betrayed souls of Isfahan, summoning forth what is widely considered to be the first manifestation of the Legion of the Damned, led by none other than the flaming vengeful spirit of Ferrus Manus himself, which, if you can't put two and two together, was the inspiration for the Burning Hand of Vengeance. Ferrus led his burning legions against the forces of Hell, driving them back and giving Ra and Dimian enough time to run into the Webway, as well as the Emperor and his forces enough time to extract back to the Imperial Palace. It was a short scene, but it was sweet. Ferrus's soul being given a chance to vent some of its wrath at all the injustice it had received. This would not be the last time we see Ferrus in the Heresy though. As Horus was ascending to become a borderline Chaos God, he wanted to start flexing, so he brought back Ferrus's soul into the material world for a laugh. He then allowed the soul of Ferrus to find Sanguinius and guide him to Horus for their showdown. The thing is though, this was actually the soul of Ferrus and he genuinely wanted to help Sanguinius. He wasn't quite himself though. It's clear that his time spent in death hadn't been kind to him, as he discussed that due to their powerful Primarch souls, death wasn't this sweet release of oblivion for Primarchs, but instead it was its own battle as the demons of the warp tried and failed to devour a Primarch soul. Interestingly, he also discussed how each demon Primarch was technically dead, which adds even more merit to my Primarch warp god theory, which states that when a Primarch becomes a demon prince, their soul is removed and replaced with the essence of the Chaos God. Thus they lose their Primarchness, making demonic ascension a side grade, not an upgrade. Hence it would make sense that their now discarded Primarch souls would come under attack by warp denizens. Sanguinius could literally hear the screaming and moaning of Angron, Fulgrim, Mortarion, and Magnus. In a more heartwarming moment, when Sanguinius declared he would kill Horus, the ghost of Ferrus smiled, something that triggered an emotional response in Sanguinius since he missed Ferrus deeply. After all, Ferrus was one of the most well-liked of all Primarchs. Horus doesn't actually end up liking that the spirit of Ferrus becomes Sanguinius' guide and hype man, so he half-heartedly attempts to banish Ferrus, but Ferrus' unbreakable will resists and he continues guiding Sanguinius. His final line to his angelic brother is, "The bastard has my skull, fetch it back. I don't much like being a trophy." Fucking love Ferrus, man. He was taken from us too soon. Tragically, Sanguinius would die much in the same way Ferrus did, rushing ahead alone to challenge a greater foe. The last thing Sanguinius would see before death is Ferrus' skull, glaring at him. As an interesting note, when Horus was slain by the Emperor, the psychic backlash allowed the Ferrus ghost to briefly materialize on Medusa in front of the Iron Hands, where he declared that when the time was right, he would return to them, because GW wanted to leave the door open for every Primarch to potentially return if they think it would make them a lot of money. Since then though, Ferrus has been well and truly dead. He doesn't seem to appear to his sons in visions like Sanguinius does, and there also isn't anyone alive who has the knowledge or power to bring him back. The only way he returns is because he would be too angry and stubborn to stay dead, and he would come back as the burning avatar of the Legion of the Damned, which he has done before, so who knows. Now in regards to that Sapphire King demon, it finally sprung its master plan in the recent setting. So the Iron Hands have been suppressing their emotions for millennia to try avoid the temptation of chaos and to overcome the weakness of flesh. However, in doing that, they had created a weakness to chaos, the repressed emotion making them more vulnerable, not less. So while they were being attacked and corrupted in an ambush, their leader realized their folly and ordered all Iron Hands to unleash their rage and emotion, to turn off their emotion blockers and become the fury of Manus. They did so, and the emotional explosion of righteous rage was like a physical smack to the demons. The furious Iron Hands slaughtered the demonic horde, Emperor's children, and even the Sapphire King himself was utterly destroyed. In doing so, the Iron Hands chapter was reborn on the right path. With the opening of the Great Rift, many Iron Hands believe this was the time Ferrus was speaking of when he said he would return, and who knows, maybe it is. After all, the Emperor is waking up, and he's the only one that can bring Ferrus back. If you enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel, then pick up the Burning Hand of Vengeance, limited time model that you don't want to miss out on. Hit the subscribe button and hit the real subscribe button for more vengeful content. Join the Discord for more memes, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.